All right. Okay. So we have on right now Alan Honner, head litigator for the
Litigation
Democracy Fund.
director at the Democracy Fund.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? I think we don't really have you on a lot because you're often in Toronto. For our viewers that don't really know who you are.
That's right. So thank you for asking me. So I'm one of the lawyers at the Democracy Fund. We have party status at the Public Order Emergency Inquiry. We're sharing that with our good friends at the JCCF and with Citizens for Freedom. One reason you probably don't see me very often is because if one of us asks questions, then the other one is not allowed to ask questions. That's just the rules of the commission.
That's right. No, that totally makes sense.
And that's another thing that I was going to ask you to clarify. So often the commissioner is going to call GCCF and the Democracy Fund all together. Instead, I think he got a little bit lazy. He only said the Democracy Fund and stopped saying GCCF. Is there a reason why you guys are together?
Well, I don't think the commissioner is lazy. I think he just sometimes refers to us in a way that's convenient.
That's right.
We're together because we have a common interest. We're JCCF and the Democracy Fund are both civil liberties organizations. They've both been involved in some way with the protesters. For the Democracy Fund, we are representing a number of people who have been criminally charged. We were at the Ottawa protests giving people free advice about their charter rights and also the limits of those charter rights.
For sure.
We were involved heavily in Windsor. We were friends of the court. We made submissions on the injunction that was issued there.
So what were your general thoughts from today's testimonies? We heard what Eva had to say, what Keith Wilson had to say. So what did you think?
Well, I haven't heard everything that Eva and Keith said, but I suspect they talked a little bit about CSIS. They probably talked a bit about Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act when CSIS suggested that maybe that's not such a good idea. So we won't revisit that.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things that we've seen, and maybe you haven't talked about this, came out later in the day when my colleague Anton from Citizens for Freedom questioned the deputy OPP.
Yes. Yeah. Jason Crowley. Yeah.
And in that video, one of the things we saw was that the police created an exclusion zone in Windsor. It was for about a stretch of 1 kilometer, right? And in fact, they were arresting protesters on the sidewalk if they were within that exclusion zone.
That's right.
And I thought that was very interesting because back on February 11th and later on February 18th, we made submissions about this injunction. And both times we made sure that we could carve out a provision in that order which respected the rights of protesters to peacefully protest.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, did you hear what he was talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we might have that clip, but that video that was brought into evidence of that woman that was peacefully kneeling well in front of the police lines, that was on the grass, but where the sidewalks are. This was just after Crowley also said that 100%, they could peacefully protest there. It was fine. And then he has this video thrown in his face, essentially, that's like, well, according to these police officers, they weren't allowed to. And according to this video, this woman that was peacefully arrested while kneeling on the grass, again, in front of police lines. I think that was, it's not just hypocritical, like it's very ironic for that to be brought up the way that it was. I quite enjoyed it though.
Yeah, no, that was pretty interesting to hear about that. All right, we only have a few minutes left of the live stream. It was such an interesting live stream. Let's take a look at clip number 5 from the commission too. Let's take a look at that.
The blockade was cleared and the bridge reopened before the Emergencies Act was invoked. Is that right?
On the 14th, so the 13th around midnight into the 14th, I think the bridge opened around midnight on the 14th. So the Emergencies Act was invoked sometime on the 14th. So yes, the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, great. So none of the measures in the Emergencies Act were used to clear the blockade since it came after, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions for you.
Necessary. Am I right?
Yeah, let's make sure we get this straight. So the bridge was cleared before Trudeau, our drama teacher, invoked the Emergencies Act.
That's right. And actually that came out last week when we cross-examined Commissioner Carrick.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just Windsor that was clear. The protest at the 402 was clear.
Mm.
The protest in Cornwall was clear. Right? The protest in Windsor, as we've seen, was also clear. The protest in Ottawa, the police were making some progress there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we know about, we're going to hear more about Coops tomorrow.
Yes. Very excited. Yeah.
And I think this is actually, it's an important point, because when we talked about this protester earlier today who was arrested on the sidewalk, that actually didn't have anything to do with the Emergencies Act, because that protester was arrested before the Emergencies Act was invoked. But it does show you something, doesn't it? It shows us the attitude that some people had towards these protesters.
Yeah.
I think that attitude probably informed the federal government when they invoked the Emergencies Act.
No, for sure. And it just like you said, it is such a shame to see something like that take place, especially when they're told one thing and then it's the misinformation and the miscommunication. I'm sure I saw some officers that didn't look too happy to be instructing folks the way that they had to, or that they did. Same way with the misinformation spread by mainstream media. But to your point about the blockades that were resolved, so to speak, before the Emergencies Act was invoked. I mean, again, just for the people in the back, it's almost like it wasn't necessary, right?
It's almost like it wasn't necessary. It's almost like we're just repeating ourselves every day.